I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris, bringing on my good friend Drew DeArmond of ESPN 97.7 in Huntsville, Alabama. The Zone, my good friend. We have done each other's shows a number of times. Thank you for making time for me on what is a crazy and busy day in the state of Alabama with the dismissal of baseball coach Brad Bohannon. Something you had a little inkling might be coming. Drew, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, it's been crazy, Chris, and it's good to be with you. And if I'm doing this on, a little after lunchtime on a Thursday, something's probably happened that's not good. If it's making news before a series, it's to start a big series, by the way, between Vanderbilt and Alabama, starting at 7 o'clock tonight on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, as there's only 3 conference weekends left. But Brad Bohannon came into this season, I think, needing to show progress, needing to get back to the NCAA for the second time in 6 years. And I think he was in the process of doing that. But, as we've seen, there's some weird things that started happening, literally and figuratively, strange things that you never see at the end of the LSU, as Alabama was wrapping up the LSU baseball series. And I know this is going to sound funny, but Alabama, I thought, played relatively well against an extremely talented team on the road, competed in every game, lost 3 really tough ball games, lost 8-6. Paul Skeens, of course, pitched game 1, and that was a situation where he gave them 6 innings, and then Alabama got to the bullpen in the 9th, made it competitive, got the winning run to the plate. Colby Shelton struck out to end the ball game, and then they played a really tough game on Friday, pardon me. Saturday. Yes, I'm sorry. I keep thinking of Thursday, Friday, Saturday for this one coming up. But yeah, it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On Saturday, they led 6-1, couldn't hold it, lost that ball game, lost a very competitive game, and then lost on Sunday 13-11. So they lost 3 really tough games, and then it comes out that there was some suspicious betting activity where the Friday game was the results, and there was a very suspicious bet, placed at some point in time. And so they're saying that Alabama baseball's betting lines have been pulled off of this certain betting institution in Ohio. And then you start hearing the talk the next day in Vegas that Alabama baseball has been pulled off the board. And then you start hearing, too, that Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, has been made aware of it. He's monitoring it. Alabama puts out a statement. And then shortly after you came on my show, the Recruiting Blitz, this morning, we recorded my daily Recruiting Blitz show and had it on our streaming channel. And we wrap it up. And as I'm, leaving the studio, I start hearing word via social media that Brad Bohannon's been dismissed. I've been on the phone ever since. And obviously, something was discovered by Greg Byrne and the administration at Alabama, and they've gone to lengths to dismiss Brad Bohannon this afternoon.
Well, look, these are delicate stories, and the challenge is hearing is you hear a lot of things. We have heard a lot of things. We've had busy mornings. We've been on the phone, and a lot of what you hear, if you're smart, doesn't make it away from your ears to the microphone. But and so it's always a little difficult to know what to say. But I'm friends with the guys at D1 Baseball, and Kendall Rogers wrote this, and they've also got more lawyers than I've got. And I'm just going to read what he wrote because I think he sums it up pretty well. And D1, how do I put this? They're careful with their words, I think is a good way to put it. They're friends of the sport. I'm not trying to say they're not journalists or they don't have a job to do, because they do. But when they speak, say some of the things that I see here, it's interesting. And I'm just going to read you, and this is Kendall's story at D1 right now. I'm just going to read you the first couple of paragraphs because I think this says it very well. Alabama terminated head baseball coach Brad Bohannon on Thursday for violating program standards. His firing comes just days after sports books in the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey halted betting on any Alabama baseball games they found suspicious. Activity tied to a specific bet from last Friday's contest between the Crimson Tide and top-ranked LSU. Alabama athletic director had this to say in a statement, and I think he meant to put Greg Byrne in there, but did not. Anyway, this was from Greg Byrne. We have initiated the termination process for head baseball coach Brad Bohannon for, among other things, violating the standards, duties, and responsibilities expected of university employees. Bohannon has been relieved of all duties, and Jason Jackson will serve as interim head coach. There will be no further comment at this time, pending an ongoing review. And then Kendall goes on to add, this will be the last part. The bets in question involve last Friday's game between Alabama and LSU. In that game, Alabama was expected to start right-handed pitcher Luke Holman against the Tigers. However, the Crimson Tide scratched him from his start a couple hours before the game. The bet in question involves a large sum of money on a parlay and a money line bet, both involving Alabama and LSU. That triggered an investigation into some suspicious activity. It's worth noting that LSU was a minus 245 favorite. He then goes on to talk about Greg Sankey's involvement, some things like that. There's a statement from Sankey. You can read Kendall's article yourself. But anyway, this just, I think, is a good way to sum up how do I put it? I think maybe consistent with some things we heard private. Was that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I mean, no question, especially, in the last couple of hours, doing your due diligence and investigating a situation. I don't think there was any doubt that some things have been compromised in the eyes of Greg Byrne, and you just read his statement, and in Greg Sankey in his mind. And so that's why they moved swiftly to terminate Brad Bohannon. And let's also not misunderstand things. I mean, Brad Bohannon came into year 6, and only made one NCAA tournament, needed to, show progress. I think he was doing that. You and I have discussed that on the Recruiting Blitz and on 97.7 The Zone's Talking Ball before. They started out the season ranked. They were still in solid shape. It looks if they had a good finish, to be in the NCAA tournament and back in Hoover, and he would have still been at the University of Alabama. But obviously, some things changed in rapid fashion in the last few days. I think we've discussed this, but it just seemed like once that report came out on Sunday, things continued to linger. There was something new coming out every day. And then this bombshell, which I think a lot of just from hearing things, I think a lot of the wheels were in motion probably, at least last night. They knew where things were trending. Certainly they weren't going to release the information until this morning. But again, That's what you have to do in these situations. And it's very, very serious matter when it comes to, betting and sports. I know, there's been a lot of things, change in the last few years with, now FanDuel being, sponsoring a lot of collegiate-based things, and the NIL world changing things where people can endorse certain things. But again, it's very, very dangerous when you get into the aspect of, I remember, Fixer Perry being involved and being associated with UNLV basketball many years ago when I was growing up. They never really, sanctioned UNLV, but there was always a specter around that. There was always a specter I remember the Stephen Headache Smith story with Arizona State years ago. That's just something that, that's an integrity issue. And if there's any sort of hint of any kind of inappropriate situations going on, you've got to make a move. And then not to mention that, like we said, Brad Bohannon had to rebuild this program basically from scratch, but had not, been competing at the highest levels of the SEC. His opponent across the state, Butch Thompson, his rival had gone to the World Series 2 of the last 3 years. And I don't know that how serious this situation is. I certainly didn't think we would be reaching the depths of this, this situation with the gambling where we are. But there's also a lawsuit being filed against Brad Bohannon and his staff from a former player. So all I'm saying is a lot of things have been coming to light in the last few weeks, as well as results on the field that begged a lot of questions. And then with what Alabama's gone through, the basketball situation well publicized with Brandon Miller, with the fact that Greg Byrne hired Brad Bohannon, and he's been probably getting blowback from the basketball situation. If now you're having to deal with this, then so I think you have to move quickly. And if you find in your due diligence that you think something happened, this is the result that we see.
Yeah, and this is a program that just hasn't caught any breaks recently, it seems to
Oh,
me.
none.
That's a tough place. You've got I guess they don't have the lottery in Alabama, do they?
Correct. They do not.
The lottery scholarship, which we have that here in Tennessee. I've said this for a long time. I think Alabama is a better baseball team than it's been given credit for being. It's 9-12 in the league. It has outscored teams 128 to 120 this year in league games. Usually that's more like an 11-10 record than it is a 9-12 record. Make of that what you want. I'm not suggesting anything there. And the constant pitching injuries this year too. So, I mean, and not just this year. Like I said, it was pre-lit before that, and just this year it's been Alabama and Arkansas in particular just both cannot seem to keep any pitchers healthy for consecutive weekends. And yet he's done a good job with the win and loss record, I think, under the circumstances, but will not be given the opportunity to lead the program going forward for reasons that are becoming seemingly clear. Where does it go for Alabama the rest of the year? I mean, I don't know how distracted this team is going to be. I think that you told me before the podcast, I think Andy Staples had tweeted that there's no suspected involvement of any players, which is great to hear. Where does this go?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, some hard questions were asked in the last few days. I'm sure Brad Bohannon, was asked some difficult questions, and I'm sure Greg Byrne did his due diligence with the Alabama staff, the rest of his staff, and the players. And so, just like I think when they were cooperating fully with the Brandon Miller situation. Now, in the Miller situation, the way some of the information was dispersed by the university probably left a lot to be desired, the way that was handled. In this situation, I'm sure Greg Byrne, you always learn from the way you handle things. And so I'm sure they did a lot of due diligence in the last 24 to 48 hours with Brad Bohannon, all the players, I'm sure, with something as serious as this, and his assistant coaches. All we know right now is that they are still slated to play Vanderbilt tonight at 7 o'clock inside Sewell Thomas Stadium. Longtime pitching coach who has been there throughout his tenure in the 6 years, Jason Jackson, is going to be the interim head coach. From what we understand, Matt Rita, Jack Hole, all these guys are going to still be part of the staff. I don't think any other changes are coming. Hunter Morris. So it's almost just like all hands on deck. And sometimes this will galvanize a team, and you can pull together and make a run. Or with as difficult as the SEC is, you got a top 5 team in Vanderbilt coming up. You got a difficult road series at Texas A&M. You got a home series with Ole Miss, who may be playing for their postseason lives. It'll be interesting to see if this Alabama team splinters or do they finish strong. And regardless, I will say this. I mean, you don't want to make a ton of assumptions, but one thing I think I can assume strongly is that there will be an entirely new staff in Tuscaloosa, even if said coaches were not involved, nor the players. I think a fresh start will be needed to be had by all, because when you have, to me, NCAA violations are one thing, but those happen at a lot of schools. But this kind of thing, you and I have talked about it. This is very unusual.
This involves the legal system.
This involves jail. This involves the legal system. This involves were games fixed. We're not saying that. But the question can be asked. And so if you're involving the integrity of the game, that is extremely serious. And we saw what happened when my childhood to Pete Rose, who's never been welcomed back to baseball since. And so I just think this is probably about as serious as it can get. And that's why Brad Bohannon was removed so quickly.
Yeah, I don't ever remember one of these in our lifetime.
No.
Quite like this one. I mean, as you mentioned some other ones that are similar.
Not in college baseball, at least.
No. Well, I mean, and even in college sports where head coach is tied. I cannot remember that happening. So
not at all.
And again, we'll see how it plays out, but and we don't know a lot of facts. We want to be careful what we say. But I think obviously you can draw plenty of conclusions pretty easily about there being concerns and the connections there. Okay, Drew, I want to ask you this. Greg Byrne's done a fine job at Alabama. They've won a lot of games, done a lot of things. I don't know the guy personally, but you had the Brandon Miller situation. Let me rephrase that. The Darius Miles situation. I have some issues with how Miller was treated, and that was slanted at times. We won't get into that today. But at the very issue At the very minimum, you have a case where you had a program that had a player inside it who maybe had some issues and committed a murder. You obviously had a culture in the program with the player that was I don't want to paint the whole team with the wrong brush, but it's problematic. And now you have this, and again, people can do things individually. People are capable of doing some pretty crazy stuff, and that doesn't always implicate someone's boss. But that's two big things where Alabama has now been in the headlines for reasons you don't want to be in the headlines. Is Greg Byrne, you think, in any kind of trouble after all these things?
Well, I'll just say this: I'm sure he's going to receive some heat
Yeah.
because it was kind of, I referenced it earlier in the conversation. But the way the information about Brandon Miller's involvement was released, the way it was handled, the way it was phrased, I think certainly Nate Oates should have been kept more in the loop. And I think instead of them doing separate press conferences, there should have been a situation where Nate Oates and Greg Byrne come together, they talk about it, and then they go out in front, do a joint press conference, and then you handle everything with the media up front. And everything just seemed disjointed. That didn't seem like it was handled properly. And I think Alabama took some extra heat because of that. It may have seemed, like that Nate Oates and maybe Greg Byrne weren't on the same page at that time, even though I believe their relationship is strong, but I just don't think it was handled properly. So, and this is the first coach during Greg Byrne's tenure as athletic director, as you know, for the 6+ years, Chris, that he hired, that he's had to dismiss, besides a volleyball coach. But I'm talking about in a high-profile, visible sport. And Brad Bohannon was the first coach he hired upon coming into the University of Alabama. So he's been at Alabama nearly 6 years. So this is a guy that he hired, he handpicked to come over from Auburn to be the head baseball coach, who had a great reputation in coaching circles. And I talked to a lot of high school and college coaches that spoke glowingly of him. But again, this is just a very ominous ending.
Yeah.
And now, Greg Byrne needed to handle this quickly. They need to get this wrapped up, and then you need to swiftly, address it, which they have. They need to continue to. And I'll be honest with you, he got the Nate Oates hire right, so he has that feather in his cap. They've turned to Alabama basketball. He made that difficult move. He has kept Nick Saban happy and motivated, and the football program is strong. Now we're at the fork in the road with baseball, where you have to decide. And he also made a change in gymnastics last year as well. But again, I'm talking about and what I mean when I talk about basketball, baseball, and football, the big three. That's what I consider the big three, the most visible sports on your campus. You have to get this hire right. Alabama has to decide, do they want to compete or not? You mentioned their difficulties with the education lottery, and that's well documented. They do not have that advantage that some other schools do. But this is the NIL era. You have NIL. Yeah. They do have a tremendous facility now that got finished just before Greg Byrne came on as AD. But guess what? There's a lot of schools in the SEC now that have outstanding facilities in baseball and that are trying to compete. That's how, when I was in school at Alabama in the late 90s, a lot of schools weren't competing. Your school that you cover so well, Vanderbilt was not, Ole Miss was not, but a lot of these schools are all in now, and they're competing at the highest level. And so Alabama had the second lowest paid coach in the country. Steve Beazer is the lowest at Missouri. I think Brad Bohannon was 13th.
In the conference, right?
You have to decide now, are you going to spend to win? Because if you get the right coach, it took Auburn a while to replace Hal Baird. But they finally found Butch Thompson. He's making twice what Brad Bohannon was. There's 9 coaches in this league making $1 million a year, Chris. There's probably going to be 11 once Oklahoma and Texas join. Are you going to get in that conversation and compete, or are you going to continue to, spend in the lower third of the league? And it just goes to show you get what you pay for. Because I think Brad Bohannon's a great man. He treated me exceptionally well in my dealings in the media. But I will be honest in that I'm paid for my opinion, and I've never been a kind of person that sugarcoats things and doesn't tell the truth. I've thought for 3+ years he was not an SEC caliber head baseball coach. from the
Yeah.
things I watched and saw and heard. And so I know they had bad luck. You're 100% correct with the pitching injuries. The COVID year happened. I think they had a really good ball club, but it's all about karma too. It's all about things happening for a reason. And I think they did. And I think Alabama, they've got a chance to start fresh here, but they got to get it right because, again, your university is going through some difficulty with their image, and your athletic director is going to be feeling some heat, and he needs to do all his due diligence like he did with Nate Oates, and he had some assistants there. But and the thing is, Greg Byrne, this is what I've tried to mention to people. He came from Arizona, which is not a football school. It is a baseball/basketball school.
Basketball.
Both of those programs were exceptional when he left. I mean, you had Sean Miller before he ran aground. He was doing very well. And I don't think he hired Sean Miller, but that program had stayed going well. And he hired Jay Johnson, who is now in the SEC. So, and they won a national championship during his tenure there at Arizona as well, and they improved the facility. So he understands college baseball. Now, when he hired Brad Bohannon in the first place, Alabama was in a dark, dark place. It was an unusual move because he had to fire somebody he didn't hire after a year, and they were, and it was a deep hole to dig out of. So he hired an unproven guy that was a recruiter, and I remember his press conference, he said, "It's going to take a few years. Please be patient." Well, now it's about time to go out, get a proven guy. Getting an unproven guy does not work in this Shark Tank. And you need to get somebody with an impeccable reputation now, especially because of what you put yourself through. Because I'll be honest, Greg Byrne, with the football program still very strong and Nate Oates doing what he's doing, I don't think he's in trouble, but we saw the hiccup with basketball. We've seen this with baseball. The way I'll phrase it is, Greg Byrne needs to clean this up and clean this up quickly.
All right, Drew, we're doing this literally just a couple hours after the announcement came down. Any clue where he may look for a replacement?
Not I haven't heard any names as of yet because it's still so fresh, Chris, but here's my theory on it. To me, you have to go get a standing head coach who's had success. I mean, it's going to be hard to pluck somebody from a plum job because if you've noticed in college baseball, and you follow it as closely as anyone, these great jobs, people stay. In college baseball especially, because college baseball is different from college basketball and college football in that you see, college football coaches that are prominent go to the NFL every now and then. You see college basketball coaches try the NBA. You don't see them do it in baseball. As a matter of fact, LSU did something just last year that we never see. They hired a professional pitching coach because they have those kind of resources. That usually doesn't happen. So if you get an SEC baseball job and you do it well, it's usually a job you will stay. And so look at Paul Maneri. I know he was under a lot of pressure, but he stayed there 15 years. It's their plum jobs. I wouldn't think Butch Thompson's looking for a job. So what you have to do is you have to do your due diligence. You may go look at Group of Five, but you look at a Group of Five program, maybe that doesn't have the resources that you have in the SEC, that's had success making the NCAA tournament, maybe winning with a little bit less than resources or, of maybe NIL or whatever that you've seen, but that you can tell through your contacts, because Greg Byrne did this in basketball. He called Tom Izzo and said, "Coach, I need a basketball coach. I need a ball coach, a guy that's in the gym. Who would you hire?" And he told him Nate Oates. He already kind of knew that's what he was going to say, but it reaffirmed what he knew. He needs to use all his contacts. He's the son of an athletic director. He's been an athletic director his entire professional career, and find the best baseball coach he can find. And, whether it be Group of Five or maybe at a Power Five school that's maybe a little off the radar, and bring them to Tuscaloosa. And then let me reiterate one other thing. One, step up your NIL game. And two, fully fund the program in that you're going to allow him to bring in a coaching staff that's not one of the lowest paid in the league. Because, again, I'll just reiterate, you get what you pay for. If you pay for a staff and give them the tools they need, like you do with Nick Saban and Nate Oates, you get results. I've seen
Yeah.
Alabama baseball be great. It's just been a long time since Jim Wells left in 09. And a lot of people wanted him to leave. And I thought he's the one that should have been supported more by the administration because he was the winningest coach in the history of the program, 6 SEC tournaments, 3 World Series. He's a broken bone and a foot away from winning one in 97. He should have been given the leeway to have whatever he needed. You've got to do that if you want to win in baseball at the highest level. And I'm not saying it'll make a ton of money, but baseball can be a big time boon for your university if you get it right. I mean, look at what Mississippi State did. They went and hired Chris Lemonis from Indiana. That's the kind of hire that Alabama needs to make.
Yeah. Ironically, you could see that one get unwound after the season too, as it's gone bad and start for quickly, and they fired a pitching coach this week.
Foxall got
that just goes to prove how
there 2 years.
how tough it is to win in this league. I mean, you can be on top of the mountain one moment and then at the bottom, and both the Mississippi schools have found that out this year.
But I will say this,
which makes
to put that out there on your show. If Ole Miss would like to let Alabama have Mike Bianco, I would take him in a millisecond.
Yeah. Well, it sounded like that was gonna be a parting of the ways a year ago had there not been a national title. So
I said this to friends when I heard that. I said, well, if so, then Greg Byrne needs to be on the phone because I know Mike Bianco can win. And I'm satisfied with how I've seen his teams play. That man showed a lot of loyalty to Ole Miss. He could have left and gone to LSU a couple of times. He did not. But again, there is a coach out there. Nate Oates was the perfect fit, in my opinion, for Alabama. Now it's up to Greg Byrne to identify the same kind of coach in baseball.
Well, if you just want to spitball some schools, and I know the SEC, I don't necessarily know the coaching situation at other places. I guess Gary Gilmore's still at Coastal Carolina. They won it all in 2016. They're having a national seed type year. Southern Miss has had some good years. Dallas Baptist, Mitch Hanna's at Indiana State. These are some coaches that are at Campbell. Gone blank on the name of the coach there. These are some mid-majors that have done good things recently with some consistency. So if you want a list of schools maybe where you go look and look, that I may have given you some stupid choices there. I don't know the exact coaching situations, but these are just some mid-major teams recently that have performed well and are performing well this year. So in any case, Drew, it's going to be a fascinating weekend. It was already going to be a fascinating weekend without all this drama between Vandy and Alabama, two very good teams. Tell folks where they can find your show. I'm sure you're going to have a very, very, very busy Friday and Monday.
Yeah, it's turned into that. Within this business, it can turn quickly. No doubt. They can connect with me at Drew D 977 ESPN on my personal account, on our station account here, 977 ESPN. They certainly can connect with us at the Blitz Sports Radio. Scott Tyson and I are on Talking Ball Monday through Friday from 7 to 9, and then from 9 to 10 a.m. We're on the Blitz Sports Radio talking recruiting and many other subjects, and we appreciate you joining us on the Blitz Sports Radio. Of course, there's a lot of I guess I wish now we could have had a 4-hour show. We'd have had a lot more to talk about, but that's the way this business is. You're kind of reacting, but certainly they can connect with me there. And if all of our content, including with yourself, you can check out our SoundCloud page at 977 ESPN. But I appreciate you for having me and giving me a chance to talk a little bit about this. And certainly it's a story we're going to be following very closely in the weeks to come. And it's something Greg Byrne certainly didn't want to have to deal with. They were already in the aftermath and trying to allow the basketball situation to play itself out. But this is just another fire to have to put out for Alabama. And it's something that, it's kind of self-inflicted, unfortunately. It's unfortunate for Brad Bohannon, who I think is a good man, but obviously made some mistakes in judgment. And now Alabama's the one having to pay for it.
Well, hey, I appreciate you joining me. Your time is going to be a little bit more under demand the next right now to 48 to 72 to how many ever hours than mine was when I was on your show this morning. But anyway, appreciate you returning the favor at a busy time, and maybe we'll be talking about Alabama turning a new page in a better direction and hiring a coach. And when that happens, we will have you on for sure, if not before.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
All right, he's Drew DeArmond of 97.7 The Zone in the Huntsville, Alabama area. Anyway, we are Southeastern 14. I'm Chris Lee. Best way to get all our baseball content. We're doing a lot of it. We're doing recaps every day. Hit that subscribe button. That's like a follow. It costs you nothing. Hit the like button. That helps our analytics. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.